I was destroyed, like on the ground, like crying.
Kelly Clarkson reveals heartbreaking truth about her last days with Brandon Blackstock. On August 6th, 2025, Kelly Clarkson posted something on Instagram that made her fans cry. She was postponing her Vegas residency because her kids needed her, and she wanted to make sure they had time with their dad, who was battling cancer. The post was pure Kelly, warm and vulnerable, saying family comes first no matter what.
My biggest dream was to have a successful marriage and successful family in whatever form that was going to be for me.
Everyone praised her grace during such a painful time. But what nobody knew in that moment was that Kelly had spent the last 5 years fighting Brandon Blackstock in one of the most brutal divorces in entertainment history. And when his obituary was published 3 days after his death, it would reveal an affair that had been hiding in plain sight since 2018. This isn't just a story about divorce or even death. This is about a woman who discovered through court documents that her own husband had illegally taken $2.6 million from her, while telling her she wasn't sexy enough for her career, who found out he'd been sleeping with her former assistant for years, and who still chose to put her children's need to say goodbye above her own justified anger. But here's what makes this story even more complicated. In December 2025, 4 months after Brandon's death, Kelly said something in an interview that changes the way you see everything that came before it. And in January 2026, just weeks ago, Kelly made a decision about her Vegas residency that reveals exactly where she stands now. Because Kelly Clarkson did something most people couldn't do, she made peace with a man who had spent years taking advantage of her, not for his sake, but for her kids. And what she's doing now proves the real win wasn't the court battles or the money, it was something else entirely. The story everyone knows is that Kelly Clarkson is America's sweetheart, the original American Idol who never forgot where she came from. She's built a career on being relatable, honest, and real.
Not everyone is deserving of your story or worth it or worth your time. And it doesn't mean that that person is bad and you're good, or you're bad and they're good.
But what made her divorce from Brandon Blackstock so shocking was that Kelly was the one who made the first move in their relationship. She pursued him. She fell hard. She built her life around a man who seemed like her perfect match. Back in 2006, Kelly met Brandon at a rehearsal for the Academy of Country Music Awards. He was a talent manager, the son of her manager, Narvel Blackstock, and he was married to someone else. Kelly admitted years later in interviews that she had an immediate attraction, but respected his marriage and kept her distance. When Brandon's first marriage ended, Kelly saw her opening. In 2012, they reconnected, and Kelly didn't play games. She made her interest clear. By December 2012, they were engaged, and by October 2013, they were married in a beautiful Tennessee ceremony. Kelly gushed about Brandon in every interview, calling him the love of her life, saying she'd never been happier. They had 2 kids together, River Rose, born in 2014, and Remington Alexander, born in 2016. And Kelly also became stepmom to Brandon's 2 kids from his first marriage, Savannah and Seth. She talked constantly about how much she loved being a mom and a wife, how Brandon made her feel safe and loved, how he understood the demands of her career because he was in the industry too. Brandon wasn't just her husband, he was her manager, handling her bookings, her contracts, her business decisions. Kelly trusted him completely with both her heart and her career. The ultimate partnership, or so she thought. But while Kelly was building what she believed was a solid marriage and family, something else was happening behind the scenes. Something that wouldn't become clear until years later when a woman named Brittany Marie Jones showed up in an obituary. But we'll get to that. In March 2020, the world shut down because of COVID. And like millions of families, Kelly and Brandon found themselves quarantined together at Brandon's ranch in Montana with all 4 kids. It was supposed to be family time, a chance to slow down and reconnect away from the chaos of Kelly's touring and TV schedule. Instead, it became the death of their marriage. Kelly has said in interviews since then that the quarantine forced them to actually spend time together in a way they hadn't in years. And what she discovered during those months was that the marriage she thought she had didn't actually exist. On June 4th, 2020, Kelly Clarkson filed for divorce in Los Angeles, citing irreconcilable differences. The filing shocked fans because as recently as March, Kelly had been posting happy family photos from Montana. The statement from her rep was standard PR language about 2 people growing apart, but the timing told a different story. Something happened during that quarantine, something bad enough that Kelly, who had spent years publicly celebrating her marriage, decided she was done. But here's what makes the timeline so revealing. And this is where the story gets darker. In December 2018, a woman named Brittany Marie Jones started working as Brandon's executive assistant. Before that, from 2016 to 2018, Brittany had been Kelly's production assistant. She worked directly with Kelly, traveled with her, was part of Kelly's inner circle. Then suddenly, in December 2018, Brittany moved from working for Kelly to working for Brandon. That's already weird, but it gets worse. In June 2020, the exact same month Kelly filed for divorce, Brittany Marie Jones moved to Montana to work at Brandon's ranch. She left Los Angeles, left the entertainment industry, and relocated to rural Montana to work for Kelly's soon-to-be ex-husband. When you lay out those dates, June 2020 divorce filing and June 2020 Brittany moves to Montana, it's not subtle. But at the time, nobody knew who Brittany Jones was. She was just a name in employment records. What Kelly discovered during that Montana quarantine, what made her file for divorce within days of coming home, that's the part of the story nobody knew until Brandon's death revealed it 5 years later. The divorce that followed Kelly's June 2020 filing was brutal in ways that went far beyond custody disputes or property division. This was a systematic legal battle where Brandon used his position as Kelly's former manager to extract as much money as possible, while Kelly fought to prove he'd been defrauding her for years. The California Labor Commissioner became involved because Kelly filed a complaint alleging that Brandon and his father's management company, Starstruck Management, had been operating as an unlicensed talent agency in violation of California's Talent Agencies Act. This wasn't just a bitter divorce move. Kelly had discovered that Brandon had been taking commissions on deals he legally wasn't allowed to broker. In November 2020, just 5 months after filing for divorce, the Labor Commissioner issued a ruling that would blow the case wide open. But before we get to the dollar amount, you need to understand what was happening behind those business transactions, because the money wasn't even the worst part. During the legal proceedings, Kelly gave a deposition that included details so personal and painful, they revealed the true nature of her marriage. And what Brandon allegedly said to her about her body and her career would end up being the thing Kelly said she would never forget. But we'll get to that. The November 2020 Labor Commissioner ruling was clear. Brandon Blackstock and Starstruck Management had illegally procured employment for Kelly Clarkson and owed her money back. The amount was over $2.6 million in illegally collected commissions from deals he wasn't licensed to negotiate, but the financial betrayal was only part of what the court proceedings exposed. The real damage was in Kelly's testimony about how Brandon had undermined her confidence and controlled her career for years. And this is where the story gets genuinely cruel. Kelly testified about a specific conversation with Brandon that she said she would never forget. According to Kelly's sworn testimony, Brandon told her that NBC didn't want her for The Voice because she wasn't sexy enough. He allegedly said the network wanted someone like Rihanna, someone who was a sex symbol, and that Kelly didn't fit that image. Kelly's exact words in her testimony were, "A wife doesn't forget a time she gets told she's not a sex symbol." Think about what that means. Brandon was Kelly's manager, the person whose job was to advocate for her and build her confidence. And he was also her husband, the person who was supposed to love her unconditionally. And according to Kelly's testimony, he used both roles to tear her down, telling her she wasn't sexy enough, she wasn't what networks wanted, she didn't have the image they were looking for. And then Kelly got the Voice job anyway, became one of the most popular coaches in the show's history, won seasons with her team members, and was so successful that NBC gave her a daytime talk show. Everything Brandon allegedly told her she couldn't do, she did. Which raises the question, was Brandon wrong about what NBC wanted? Or was he deliberately trying to undermine Kelly's confidence to maintain control over her career and her sense of self-worth? The court clearly believed the latter because the financial rulings went heavily in Kelly's favor. Brandon wasn't done fighting. He appealed the Labor Commissioner decision, dragging the case out for years while simultaneously demanding spousal support. He filed for $430,000 per month in spousal and child support combined, claiming he'd given up his career to support Kelly's and now deserved to maintain the lifestyle they'd built together. In March 2022, a judge ordered Kelly to pay Brandon $195,000 per month total. That's $2.34 million per year to a man who had been found to have defrauded her. Kelly was literally paying Brandon while simultaneously fighting to get back the money he'd stolen. The legal battles consumed years of Kelly's life while she was filming her talk show, raising 4 kids with primary custody, and touring when she could. Through it all, she maintained her public persona, warm and funny and grateful, never trash-talking Brandon in interviews, never using her platform to publicly shame him. But anyone paying attention to the legal filings knew the truth. Then in May 2024, something shifted. Kelly and Brandon reached a confidential settlement that resolved all outstanding issues. The terms weren't made public, but the fact that Brandon agreed to settle suggests Kelly's legal team had him cornered. They reached an agreement, signed the papers, and the legal war was finally over. 4 years after Kelly filed for divorce, she was free. Kelly had spent millions on legal fees, millions more in support payments to Brandon, and 4 years of her life fighting a man she'd once loved. In interviews during 2024 and early 2025, Kelly seemed lighter, talking about how much she loved her life, how happy she was, how great things were going. She'd moved past it, and then Brandon got sick. The public didn't know Brandon Blackstock was dying. There were no announcements, no fundraisers, no social media posts asking for prayers. According to sources close to the family, Brandon's diagnosis with melanoma came sometime in 2022, right in the middle of the legal battles with Kelly. He was fighting cancer while fighting his ex-wife in court, undergoing treatment while appealing financial rulings. Kelly knew because they were co-parenting, but she didn't talk about it publicly, didn't use his illness as a reason to reduce support payments, didn't weaponize his health in court. She just quietly made sure their kids could see their father. By the summer of 2025, Brandon's condition had worsened, and it became clear he was dying. Kelly was scheduled to begin a residency at Planet Hollywood in Las Vegas in mid-August, a major career milestone and a significant payday. But on August 6, 2025, Kelly posted on Instagram that she was postponing the residency, saying family had to come first and she needed to be with her kids during a difficult time. Hours later, news broke that Brandon was in hospice care in Montana. Let's be clear about what Kelly was doing. She was taking her kids, who were 11 and 9 years old, to Montana to watch their father die, putting her career on hold, losing money from postponed shows, and spending her time facilitating a goodbye between her children and a man who had betrayed her in almost every way possible. She wasn't doing this because she'd forgiven Brandon or because she wanted to support him. She was doing this because her kids needed to say goodbye to their dad, and Kelly understood that their grief and their need for closure mattered more than her anger. On August 7, 2025, Brandon Blackstock died at age 48 at his ranch in Montana. Kelly didn't post about his death on social media, didn't release a statement, stayed silent, protecting her kids' privacy and her own grief. But then Brandon's obituary was published, and it revealed something that changed the entire narrative of their divorce, something that confirmed what Kelly had apparently known since that Montana quarantine in June 2020. The obituary for Brandon Blackstock was standard at first. Born in Fort Worth, survived by his 4 children, River, Remington, Savannah, and Seth. Loved music and the outdoors. And then came the line that made everyone who'd followed Kelly's divorce stop and read again. Buchanan was survived by his loving partner, Brittany Marie Jones. Not girlfriend, not companion, loving partner. The obituary listed Brittany in the same breath as his children, identifying her as a central figure in his life. And suddenly, everyone started doing the math. Brittany Marie Jones had worked for Kelly as a production assistant from 2016 to 2018, became Brandon's executive assistant in December 2018, moved to Montana in June 2020, the month Kelly filed for divorce, and now in August 2025, Brandon's obituary identified her as his loving partner. If Brittany was his partner at the time of his death in 2025, and she'd moved to Montana in June 2020, that means they'd been together for at least 5 years. But when did the relationship actually start? The timeline suggests it began sometime between late 2018, when Brittany became Brandon's assistant, and early 2020, before Kelly discovered it during quarantine, which means Brandon was having an affair with Kelly's former production assistant for at least a year and possibly 2 years before Kelly filed for divorce. Brittany wasn't some random woman Brandon met after the marriage fell apart. She was someone Kelly had worked with, someone who'd been in Kelly's home, someone who'd traveled with Kelly, someone Kelly had trusted. And according to the timeline that the obituary confirmed, Brittany and Brandon had been together potentially since 2018, maybe earlier. Kelly spent 2020 to 2024 fighting Brandon in court over money he'd illegally taken, over support payments he claimed he needed, over custody arrangements for their kids, and the entire time Brandon was in Montana with Brittany, the woman who'd been Kelly's employee before becoming his partner. Kelly never publicly mentioned Brittany, never used the affair as ammunition in court, never told the tabloids, never tried to destroy Brandon's reputation or paint him as a cheater who'd left her for her own assistant. She stayed silent. And now, Brandon's own obituary had confirmed what Kelly had apparently known since June 2020. The affair had been real, it had been serious, and it had lasted right up until Brandon's death. But here's what nobody expected. What Kelly did next, 4 months after Brandon's death, revealed something about her that's almost impossible to comprehend. After Brandon died in August 2025, Kelly went silent. She didn't post about his death, didn't attend any public memorial service, didn't give interviews about grief or loss or how the kids were handling it. She just disappeared from public life for a while, protecting her children and herself from the media circus. When Kelly did start posting on social media again in September and October 2025, she focused on work, on her talk show returning for a new season, on new music, on Vegas residency dates being rescheduled for 2026. She was moving forward, and she was doing it without making Brandon's death part of her public narrative. But in December 2025, 4 months after Brandon's death, Kelly gave a rare update during an interview promoting her Christmas special, and what she said was the first time she'd acknowledged Brandon's death publicly. She was asked how the kids were doing, and her answer was brief but telling. She said River and Remy had been through a lot, and she was focused on making sure they felt safe and loved. And then she said something that reveals exactly who Kelly Clarkson is. She talked about how their new daily routine included something she called snuggle time, where no matter how busy the day had been, they all climbed into bed together and just held each other. Kelly's voice broke a little when she described it, saying that the snuggle time had become her favorite part of every day because it reminded her what actually mattered. She didn't mention Brandon by name, didn't talk about his death or his illness or how they'd handled the final months. She just acknowledged that her kids had experienced loss and trauma, and her job as their mom was to help them survive it. That December 2025 interview was the only time Kelly has publicly acknowledged Brandon's death, and even then, she kept it focused on her children rather than on her own feelings or the complicated history of their marriage. But what Kelly hasn't said speaks louder than anything she could have said. She hasn't called Brandon a cheater, hasn't exposed the affair publicly, even though the obituary did it for her, hasn't talked about the years of legal battles or the money he took or the cruel things he allegedly said to undermine her confidence. She hasn't written a tell-all memoir or given a tearful interview or posted cryptic lyrics about betrayal. She's just stayed quiet and focused on her kids and kept moving forward because she understood something that most people don't. Kelly Clarkson could have destroyed Brandon Blackstock's reputation. She had the platform, the evidence, and the public sympathy to do it. She could have gone on her talk show and told the entire story, could have written songs explicitly about his betrayal, could have let the tabloids run wild with details from the court filings, but she didn't. And the reason she didn't isn't because she's weak or afraid of conflict. The reason Kelly stayed silent is because she understood that her kids didn't need to grow up reading articles about how terrible their father was. River and Remy didn't need to see their mom trash-talking their dad on television, didn't need the world knowing every detail of the affair, or the financial fraud, or the cruel comments about Kelly not being sexy enough. They needed to remember their dad as their dad, flawed and complicated, but still their father. Kelly's silence wasn't about protecting Brandon, it was about protecting River and Remy from having their grief complicated by public anger. When those kids are old enough to ask questions, Kelly will tell them the truth, but she's letting them process their father's death without the added trauma of watching their mom wage a public war against his memory. That's not weakness. That's a level of emotional maturity and selflessness that most people could never manage. Kelly also understood that Brandon's death didn't erase what he'd done, but it did end the fight. She'd won the legal battles, gotten her money back, gotten primary custody, built a life and career that proved everything Brandon allegedly said she couldn't do. She didn't need to keep fighting a dead man to prove she'd been right. By the time Brandon died in August 2025, Kelly had already moved on. She was thriving, her talk show had won multiple Emmys, her Vegas residency was selling out, her kids were happy and healthy, she'd bought a home she loved. She'd rebuilt her life into something that was entirely hers, not shaped by someone else's expectations or control. Brandon's death was sad because it meant her kids lost their father, but it wasn't sad because Kelly lost Brandon. She'd lost him years earlier when she discovered who he really was. The court documents told the story Kelly never had to tell. Brandon illegally took over $2.6 million. He undermined her confidence while managing her career. He had an affair with someone from Kelly's own team. He fought her in court for years, trying to extract as much money as possible. And Kelly still made sure their kids could say goodbye to him before he died. That's not about Brandon deserving Kelly's compassion. He didn't. That's about Kelly being the kind of mother who puts her children's emotional well-being above her own need for vindication. The last days Kelly spent with Brandon, or more accurately, the last days she made sure her kids spent with Brandon, were a gift, not to him, but to River and Remy. Kelly gave her children the chance to have closure, to have final memories, to not spend the rest of their lives wondering if they could have said one more thing to their dad. She gave them that even though it meant postponing her career, even though it meant being in Montana near the man who'd betrayed her, even though it cost her financially and emotionally, and she did it without making it about herself or her pain or her justified anger. And now, here's what changes everything. In January 2026, just 3 weeks ago, Kelly Clarkson announced that her postponed Vegas residency would officially begin on February 14th, 2026, Valentine's Day. She posted about it on Instagram with a simple caption that said, "Time to come home to Vegas, let's do this." No mention of Brandon, no explanation for the delay beyond what she'd already said about family coming first, just a straightforward announcement that she was ready. Kelly Clarkson is starting her Vegas residency on Valentine's Day, the most romantic day of the year, the day that used to represent her marriage, and she's reclaiming it. She's not hiding. She's not running from the pain or the memories or the complicated emotions. She's standing on a stage in Vegas on Valentine's Day and singing her heart out because that's who she is. The woman who was told she wasn't sexy enough, who discovered her husband had been stealing from her, who found out he was sleeping with her former assistant, who spent 4 years fighting him in court, who made sure her kids could say goodbye to him even after all of that, is starting her Vegas residency on Valentine's Day 2026. That's not just moving on, that's winning. Kelly Clarkson won, not because Brandon died, but because she refused to let what he did define who she became. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need a public takedown. She didn't need to destroy his memory. She just needed to keep being Kelly, the woman who sings about heartbreak and survival, who prioritizes her kids above everything, who turns pain into power without making it a performance. On February 14th, 2026, Kelly Clarkson will walk onto that Vegas stage, and every person in that audience will know the story behind her smile. They'll know what she survived, what she sacrificed, what she chose to protect, and when she sings, it won't be in spite of what Brandon did to her. It'll be proof that he never had the power to stop her. That's the truth Kelly Clarkson has been revealing all along, and that Valentine's Day show is her final answer to anyone who ever doubted it.